In April 2025, Donald Trump introduced a sweeping economic maneuver, the imposition of a cumulative 104% tariff on goods imported from China. This bold policy move, part of a broader protectionist agenda, instantly sparked headlines, market reactions, and political debate. Yet, beyond the realm of policy and economics, there is a quieter, deeper story to tell. One about stress, identity, resilience, and emotional fallout. For psychology students and practitioners, these events offer an urgent case study in how macroeconomic decisions shape micro-level human experience. While tariffs may initially appear to be fiscal instruments, their effects quickly become psychological. Many people mistakenly believe that tariffs are punitive measures imposed on foreign nations, that the targeted country pays the cost. In reality, it is domestic consumers who absorb the impact through higher prices on everyday goods. This misunderstanding obscures the real burden financial strain at home, particularly among working families and students already navigating tight budgets. That economic pressure ripples outward into institutional disruption, social division, and widespread anxiety. Psychology students are uniquely positioned to understand and articulate these consequences, using the tools of their discipline to help themselves and others navigate uncertainty with greater insight and resilience. This video summarizes the article linked in the YouTube description below, which explores the psychological dimensions of economic policy through the lens of recent tariff actions. Rather than focusing on the technicalities of trade, we examine how uncertainty, scarcity, and socio-political rhetoric affect mental health, identity, and community cohesion, and how psychology offers meaningful responses to these stressors. To appreciate the psychological fallout of tariff policies, one must understand the human brain's deep need for predictability and control. Across nearly every major psychological theory, from Maslow's hierarchy of needs to neurobiological models of stress regulation, stability, and a sense of control, are recognized as foundational to mental well-being. Economic policies that introduce sudden or prolonged uncertainty through rising costs, market volatility, job insecurity, or institutional strain disrupt not only financial planning but emotional equilibrium. This is not merely about dollars and cents, it is about fear, cognitive overload, and the erosion of psychological safety. Tariffs, by raising the price of imported goods, increase financial pressure on consumers in ways that are often invisible until they are suddenly unavoidable. For working families and students already operating with little margin, even modest price hikes in essential goods, groceries, electronics, transportation, and textbooks can feel destabilizing. These aren't abstract shifts in purchasing power. They are the difference between affording a laptop or falling behind in coursework, between buying healthy food or skipping meals, between functioning and floundering. For a psychology student juggling tuition, rent, and academic expectations, every additional cost intensifies the emotional strain. These compounding pressures can lead to chronic stress, fragmented sleep, mood swings, and difficulty with sustained concentration, conditions that make success not only harder to achieve, but harder to even imagine. The human brain's stress response system, particularly the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal (HPA) axis, is exquisitely sensitive to the perception of threat, including financial threat. When the future feels uncertain and basic needs feel precarious, the HPA axis remains activated, flooding the body with cortisol. Initially, this activation is adaptive, part of the brain's survival system. But when stress becomes chronic, as it often does under sustained economic hardship, cortisol remains elevated, emotional regulation declines, immune function weakens, and the risk for anxiety, depression, and burnout increases significantly. Cognitive functioning also suffers, working memory shrinks, problem-solving capacity narrows, and the brain begins to prioritize short-term survival over long-term planning. This isn't merely theoretical. Empirical studies of past economic downturns, such as the 2008 financial crisis or periods of high inflation, show marked increases in rates of depression, anxiety disorders, substance use, and even suicide. The psychological impact of economic stress is well documented and deeply human. When prices rise and stability falters, people experience more than a loss of income. They experience a loss of control, of security, and of belief in a manageable future. What begins as a trade policy too often ends as a widespread psychological burden. Understanding this chain reaction is essential for psychology students and practitioners alike. It allows them to see economic disruption not just as a societal event, but as a lived trauma, played out in classrooms, homes, relationships, and inner lives. And it equips them to respond with empathy, clarity, and skill. Financial strain also reduces cognitive bandwidth. The concept of mental load, explored in both behavioral economics and psychology, describes how stress consumes finite cognitive resources. When a person is preoccupied with budgeting every dollar, anticipating bills, or worrying about affording groceries, they have less mental capacity available for academic work, creative thinking, or effective problem solving. This diminished cognitive bandwidth doesn't just make tasks harder, it reshapes how individuals prioritize, react, and regulate their emotions. For students, whose success hinges on sustained focus, memory retention, and psychological presence, the impact is particularly acute. Imagine a graduate student already balancing a part-time job, a full course load, and family responsibilities. Now layer on the burden of increased living expenses caused by economic shifts. The student's cognitive system becomes overloaded, not because they lack intelligence or drive, but because the brain, under chronic financial stress, reallocates energy toward survival-oriented thinking. Their ability to engage in higher-order processes like abstract reasoning, long-term planning, empathy, or ethical deliberation begins to erode. Concentration slips, irritability rises, emotional fatigue settles in. And with that fatigue often comes shame. Students internalize the strain, wondering why they can't just manage like others seem to. This self-blame compounds the psychological toll. Many assume their inability to function at peak capacity is a personal failing, not realizing they're exhibiting predictable, well-documented responses to prolonged cognitive stress. In reality, their symptoms reflect the mind doing its best to adapt to conditions of scarcity and threat. The impact of tariff policy extends far beyond individual wallets. It reshapes how people perceive each other and who is seen as belonging. Social psychology teaches us that economic uncertainty activates identity-based defenses. According to social identity theory, developed by Henri Tajfel and John Turner, when individuals feel threatened, especially by forces outside their control, they are more likely to cling tightly to group identities that offer a sense of safety, pride, or meaning. In such moments, the psychological impulse to protect us often comes at the expense of them. Tariff policies, especially when framed within nationalist or populist rhetoric, intensify this effect. They not only function as economic tools, but also signal moral and cultural allegiances. The result is a psychological climate where foreigners, immigrants, and even international students are viewed not just as outsiders, but as competitors, threats, or scapegoats for economic hardship. Suspicion replaces curiosity. Simplistic narratives replace complex truths. What might begin as an economic debate quietly morphs into social fragmentation. This phenomenon is not new. History is replete with examples of economic downturns coinciding with the rise of xenophobia, cultural scapegoating, and rigid in-group out-group distinctions. The Great Depression saw surges in anti-immigrant sentiment and racialized fear. More recently, global financial crises have fueled waves of nationalism and exclusionary politics across numerous countries. Psychology helps us understand that such patterns are not accidental. They emerge from predictable human responses to scarcity, insecurity, and uncertainty. For psychology students from minority, immigrant, or international backgrounds, this climate creates additional emotional labor and identity stress. Subtle changes in classroom dynamics, less eye contact, fewer invitations to group work, or increased microaggressions can send signals of exclusion. Campus discourse may take on nationalistic overtones, or cultural ignorance may harden into suspicion. Even well-intentioned institutions can inadvertently create environments where diverse students feel invisible, unwelcome, or hypervisible for the wrong reasons. The psychological toll is significant. Increased anxiety, hypervigilance, loneliness, and a diminished sense of belonging are common. Students may begin to question their safety, their worth, or their place in academic and professional spaces. This isn't merely emotional discomfort. It can impair concentration, undermine confidence, and erode mental health over time. Identity threat, when combined with academic pressure, creates a compounding burden that is often invisible to others, but profoundly destabilizing to those experiencing it. Moreover, the societal focus on protectionism during times of economic instability often promotes what might be called emotional contraction, a pulling inward that limits empathy, fosters tribalism, and encourages moral disengagement. People become less able or willing to imagine life through someone else's eyes. Compassion gives way to defensiveness. Dialogue gives way to suspicion. This psychological posture is antithetical to the core values of psychology: openness, reflection, empathy, and growth. Yet, it is precisely in these moments that psychology students and practitioners have an opportunity and a responsibility to act as cultural witnesses. By understanding the mechanisms behind reactive thinking, prejudice, and social fragmentation, they can challenge the narratives that dehumanize. They can restore nuance where oversimplification has taken hold, and they can embody empathy in environments increasingly shaped by fear. Being a cultural witness does not mean having all the answers. It means having the courage to notice what others ignore, the language to name what others can't articulate, and the presence to remain grounded when others are swept into emotional extremes. In doing so, psychology students help create more humane communities, on campus and beyond, and preserve the very psychological capacities that make healing, connection, and progress possible. In the face of economic uncertainty and social upheaval, psychology does more than observe or diagnose. It equips. It offers frameworks, tools, and mindsets that empower individuals to not only survive disruption, but to grow through it. For students of psychology in particular, these tools are not abstract. They are lived experiences, practiced in real time, in classrooms, conversations, and private moments of doubt. The same concepts they study to help others can and should be used to navigate their own stress, uncertainty, and emotional strain. Cognitive reframing is one of the most accessible and evidence-based tools for managing psychological distress. Originating in the cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, tradition, reframing teaches individuals to recognize and challenge automatic, distorted thoughts that heighten emotional suffering. When faced with a difficult economic reality, rising tuition, increased food prices, or shrinking job prospects, students may find themselves overwhelmed by thoughts like, "I'll never finish school," or "there's no point in trying." These are cognitive distortions. All or nothing thinking, fortune-telling, catastrophizing. Reframing invites a different internal dialogue. "This is hard, but it won't last forever," or "I'm under pressure, but I've made it through challenges before." It doesn't deny reality. It places that reality in a broader, more manageable context. Mindfulness and emotional regulation strategies address the physiological side of stress. Economic uncertainty doesn't just live in the mind, it shows up in the body. Elevated cortisol, racing thoughts, shallow breathing, and chronic fatigue are common during prolonged stress. Mindfulness-based practices like deep breathing, guided meditation, and even simple grounding exercises can help regulate the nervous system. Journaling, body scans, or mindful walking can restore a sense of presence and clarity. These techniques strengthen the brain's prefrontal cortex, responsible for executive functioning and emotional regulation, helping students respond with awareness rather than react out of fear. For psychology students, practicing these techniques offers both relief and embodiment of the tools they may one day teach to others. Resilience building goes beyond bouncing back. It involves integrating hardship into a deeper sense of identity and purpose. Acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT, offers a powerful model for this process. Rather than trying to avoid or eliminate difficult emotions, ACT encourages individuals to make space for discomfort while taking actions aligned with their core values. A student facing economic strain may still choose to show up to class, apply for scholarships, or continue research, not because conditions are easy, but because the pursuit of growth remains meaningful. In this way, hardship becomes a crucible for value clarification. What matters most? What kind of person do I want to be, even in difficulty? These questions offer a psychological compass when external markers of stability falter. Social connection is among the most robust protective factors in psychological health. During turbulent times, isolation tends to increase, both emotionally and practically. Financial stress can lead to shame, causing individuals to pull away from peers. Campus resources might begin to feel out of reach, and conversations about hardship may be avoided due to stigma. Yet this is precisely when community is most essential. Peer support groups, student organizations, shared meals, and student-faculty mentorships become anchors of belonging and safety. For psychology students, the opportunity is twofold: to seek support and to model vulnerability and empathy. By naming their own struggles, they create space for others to do the same, cultivating emotionally intelligent communities capable of weathering instability together. Help seeking is a marker of maturity, not failure. Despite growing awareness of mental health issues, many students still hesitate to seek professional support, fearing judgment, appearing weak, or simply not knowing where to begin. Psychology students must lead the way in dismantling these barriers by accessing campus counseling centers, requesting academic accommodations, or participating in therapy themselves. Doing so not only fosters their own resilience, but deepens their understanding of the therapeutic process. It teaches them firsthand the courage it takes to ask for help, the nuance involved in navigating systems of care, and the strength that comes from not going it alone. Together, these tools, cognitive reframing, mindfulness, value-driven action, social connection, and help-seeking, form a psychological toolkit for turbulent times. They remind us that while we may not control the economy, policy decisions, or political headlines, we can always influence how we meet these challenges. We can cultivate steadiness within ourselves, offer compassion to others, and create communities that hold space for complexity and growth. For psychology students, this moment is not just an academic challenge, it is a living laboratory. By applying what they know, reflecting on what they feel, and reaching out when needed, they are already engaging in the very work they are preparing to do in the world. And in doing so, they model a truth that psychology, at its best, teaches us all. Hardship can be a site of transformation, and awareness can be the first step toward healing. Beyond individual coping, psychology students hold a unique opportunity to lead. In times of social tension and economic fear, those with insight into human behavior have a responsibility to speak up, to translate psychological knowledge into action. This might mean facilitating dialogue, challenging harmful narratives, or simply listening deeply when others vent their fears. Students who understand cognitive biases, stress responses, and identity theory can help communities avoid falling into blame, division, or despair. They can model vulnerability without weakness, empathy without naivety, and activism without aggression. This is how psychology becomes a civic force. In academic settings, psychology students can work to preserve inclusive, supportive learning environments. They can advocate for mental health services, support international classmates, and infuse emotional intelligence into campus conversations. These acts, though small, ripple outward. Economic policy is not abstract. It is lived. It is emotional. It is human. Tariffs, though often presented as technical tools of trade or national strategy, are deeply personal in their effects. They shape daily decisions, emotional responses, relationship dynamics, and community structures. They determine what families can afford, how institutions function, how individuals view their futures, and how people perceive one another. Every policy has a psychological footprint, and in times of disruption, that footprint grows deeper. For psychology students and practitioners, this is not just a matter of academic curiosity. It is a call to action, a reminder that theory cannot live in isolation. It must breathe within the world that needs it. The disciplines we study, stress, identity, resilience, cognition, group behavior, are not locked in textbooks. They are playing out in real time, in students trying to focus under financial pressure, in communities grappling with scapegoating, and in institutions stretching to meet mental health needs with too few resources. This is where psychology proves its relevance, not only by explaining human behavior, but by guiding it toward greater awareness, compassion, and health. Psychology teaches us that pain demands a response, that systems shape psyches, that economic scarcity is not only a matter of finances, but of cognitive load, emotional availability, and social empathy. It teaches us that people act not only out of reason, but out of fear, fatigue, and the desire to belong. In times of uncertainty, the role of the psychologist, or the psychology student, is to help others navigate these forces without losing their humanity. Tariffs may not be a typical topic in a psychology lecture, but they are a perfect case study for how policy becomes psychology. They challenge us to connect dots others may overlook, from global economics to personal meaning-making, from national rhetoric to local anxiety. They remind us that no psychological symptom exists in a vacuum, and that resilience is not just personal, but social, supported by inclusive systems, open dialogue, and empathetic leadership. The true power of psychology lies not in diagnosis alone, but in its ability to humanize, to see behind behavior into the forces that shape it, to offer language for pain and tools for change, to resist the reduction of individuals into economic units or cultural stereotypes, and to say, again and again, that even in times of fear and fragmentation, emotional insight and human connection are renewable resources. In the end, psychology doesn't give us all the answers, but it helps us ask better questions. It invites us to approach each moment not just as observers, but as participants in the shaping of a more emotionally intelligent world. In doing so, we not only study the mind, we serve it. I'm RJ Starr, Professor of Psychology. Thank you for watching. If you found this video enlightening, please like, share, subscribe. You know the drill. But more importantly, take what you've heard today and think about how it applies to your life. Stay curious, stay kind, and I'll see you in the next video.